Welcome to Retirement Rescue Radio, a show specifically designed to help retirees and pre-retirees maximize their financial efficiency so you can live the retirement lifestyle you've always imagined. Your host is Nate Miller, investment advisor representative and author of the CPR Retirement Rescue Roadmap. Nate discusses thoughts and ideas from some of today's most knowledgeable professionals in the field of finance. He offers strategies along the way to help you make better financial decisions so you can maximize your retirement. This is Retirement Rescue Radio.
Well, hey there, Retirement Rescue Radio listeners. I'm your host, Nate Miller, and we've got a very special episode today. We've got Allan Milham with us. And if you don't know Allan, you need to know Allan. He's in the top 3% of coaches in the ICF, the International Coaches Federation. He's got 25 years of coaching and leadership experience, and he also holds a graduate degree in counseling psychology. And today, Allan and I are going to be talking about his experiences working with everyone from Fortune 50 executives to Olympians, everybody in between, and really coaching them into their second or their third act, through major life transitions, really defining what first act, second act, third act really are. And we're going to be defining what a high impact retirement really is. And one of the things I'm excited about, today is we're really going to be digging into how to create a custom roadmap for your retirement and really address the question, so what do we do now that we're retired? And also make sure to stay all the way to the end. We're going to give you some resources to help you find out if you are really ready to make some of those transitions. Allan's got a great resource for you that can help you do that, help you answer that question. So if you're entering retirement or if you're already there, if any of these things hit home with you, make sure to drop us some questions at asknate@retirementrescueradio.com or reach out to Allan at questage.com, which will be linked in the show notes. And then share this with who you know, right? Share it with your friends, share it with your family, anyone else that might be approaching retirement or might already be in retirement. They need to get this information. So let's go ahead and get started. And then please enjoy my interview with Allan Milham. Well, hey there, Retirement Rescue Radio listeners. I'm your host, Nate Miller, and we've got a great episode here. We just talked about Allan Milham and all the great things that he has done. But honestly, Allan, and first off, thank you for coming on. How are you?
I am in good shape, excited for this conversation.
Perfect. Thank you. Are you ready to rescue some retirements?
It's time. Let's go.
Well, great. Well, before we get into that, what I always like to ask a lot of my attendees, just to kind of, get to know you a little bit better past everything that you can read online that we just went through. But is there anything, interesting or unique about you that's not readily available there in the web?
Boy, there's a lot on the web. I think the one thing that stands out that has not been published is that I was a fan of the unicycle when I was a kid.
Oh, really?
And have really, that was just something I took to, and it was a strange hobby in the Midwest to take that one on, but I absolutely loved it. And in fact, I've been challenged to get back on one of recent, although they're recommending headgear, knee gear, and elbow gear just because it's been a while.
Which even I didn't grow up with.
There you
It was on a two-wheeled cycle, right?
Times have changed.
So the question I have to ask now is, riding a unicycle just like riding a bike, you never forget?
I believe so. But all those that are around me that have heard this conversation of recent are recommending that we do this in a very protected area. So
maybe on if you go to a gymnastics area where they've got the
could
pad.
be.
Yeah,
that's right.
A great place to start.
Very good.
It's a little less when you fall.
Yeah. Right. Or solitary confinement. Sure, in a prison.
There you go.
There you go. All right.
Well, great. Well, the first thing I want to go to is I definitely want to get to some of your work with Olympians. But, you're talking here about how to make, your third act the best. And I've had all kinds of coaches that have come on here, and we've got first act, second act, now third act, right? And so some people I think are defining the second act and the third act as the same life phase. And so how do you go about distinguishing the third act from the second act, or how do you distinguish each different phase in there?
Well, that's a great question. And the truth is, when we're very much have a holistic model. So we're
Mhm.
taking the whole person into consideration. And so, we sort of just go with the rule of thumb of 90 to 100 years of life, and we divide it by three. So that first act really is, very much the beginning days and family and school and education and getting into career, family, and whatnot. And then that second act is really the robust, the 30, 40, 60, where you're fully on. And that third act for us then really is looking at 60 till we go upstairs, and a lot of our work actually takes us back to the first and second act because we're pulling out really the essence of what really matters for our clients, and both from a productivity perspective on the career side, whether it's consulting or foundation work or charity, but also on the life side, where we're really looking to say, how can we create a compelling roadmap for you that has you excited to wake up on Monday mornings for the third act of your life? And we can go deeper into that in our interview.
Definitely. And it's interesting. So there's a very famous person, Ben Franklin, where a lot of people have said that he had three main phases of his life as well. The first one was the businessman, where I don't know necessarily that he invented franchising, but that's kind of what he did with his printing business. But then after that was the inventor and then the statesman. And so three very distinct phases of his life. And he definitely didn't slow down in any of them.
Well, I like the statesman, because we really look at it through the eye of the elder, the wise man, the sage, and if we look at other countries, particularly Japan, that third act is revered, right? And we have an opportunity in the States to, particularly with the size of the baby boomer generation, we have an opportunity to really reinvent, how we're going to approach all that. And that's where Questage comes in.
Good deal. So and we might talk a little bit about how to create that custom retirement and really just answer the question, what do you do now that you are retired? and I've had several retirement consultants that have been on here, but I think you're the only one that's really worked with Olympians. And so I would love to hear a little bit about how you're working with Olympians for this whole transition into the third act that you're talking about.
So my early career in my 30s, when I was finishing grad school, I worked for one of the world's largest career consulting firms. And during the time I was there, we were actually sponsors of the U.S. Olympics. And so I had the privilege, we were in San Francisco, and I had the privilege of working with a couple of Olympians. And what was so amazing about their story was that I was really clear on how they were well muscled in their sport. They were all in individual sports.
Unintended?
Right, exactly. And so the thing I couldn't get my head around, Nate, was the fact that how are they not freaking out? These are 20 and 21-year-olds with millions of people globally looking at them. And with no education, every one of them had the ability to sort of notice who got the microphone in their head, right? Between the critic, that inner critic, fear and doubt, you're not ready, you're going to fail, and that more positive voice of the champion that really said, no, you're prepared, ready to go. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. If these 20 and 21-year-olds can actually do that, then I think my 30, 40, 50, and 60-year-old leaders can be in that conversation. So it really informed my performance model that I've used for the last 25 years. And today, Questage is really now moving from, we do have a complete leadership track, but a couple of years ago, I just woke up and, I just thought, wow, we've got, 10,000 people retiring a day. We have, we're breaking all the rules of what it looks like to retire. If you think back to your grandparents' generation, or even your parents' generation, right? And there's just new rules of engaging. And so as I was reflecting on that, I actually remembered a really sad moment I had as a career consultant where an executive came into my office, and you couldn't walk in off the street. Companies afforded these programs, and mostly out of merger and acquisition that we were dealing with. And he was a CFO, probably about 60 years old, and he did not get the job. The other CFO got it. What I remember, Nate, so vividly is how sad he was, depressed, right? Here we were in my room, and for the first time in life, there was no business card, no comp, no job, and there was no there. I mean, his whole identity had been his work.
Yeah.
And I just sort of, woke up with this memory, and I thought, wait a minute, we need to change this narrative for the third act of life, because we actually work with leaders who desire to continue to lead. We really believe that we can't afford to stop leading. We actually have a void for another 10 years because the generation behind the boomers is, for whatever reason, it only was for 15 years. So the Gen Zs, the Gen X, excuse me, the Gen X, 65 to 80, they're only 49 million to our 73 million. And then the millennials are 83 million. So we actually have 10 years before we can close that gap. And we need the world to have those leaders, that knowledge, those skill sets. And so a part of the work when we're talking about third act of life is how they can continue to lead and be purposeful, as well as designing a roadmap that's compelling for their personal goals.
Okay. So not just going and finding a golf course to play on all day, every day.
Correct.
Something that, yeah. And so, if the seniors and the boomers, or, those that are just coming up into retirement here in the next 10 years, if they really start to grasp this leadership in retirement, and especially taking a nod from Ben Franklin and what he was able to do.
That's right. Statesman. Yeah.
In life. I mean, what kind of impact do you think that could have?
Huge. Actually unknown, but that is a part of why we're, holding the rudder fiercely in our hands to be able to really take this narrative and make it bigger. We have two worlds right now. We have one world where people who are approaching retirement or are retired, they've actually saved. They have a game plan. And those are the ones that we really enjoy working with, because they have resources, they have energy. And again, you're noticing that I'm using the word leadership because that's a space I've been in for my entire life. So we've worked up into Fortune 50 companies and with very powerful entrepreneurs. And there's that delicate dance when we get to the door of the third act of life and how we're going to re-engineer ourselves. But unfortunately, as you know, there's also, a population, particularly in the boomers, that will they'll have to work the rest of their lives in order to have those resources. And that concerns me.
Mm-hmm.
But our focus is really more geared towards those that have resources so they can help their communities. We regard leadership holistically. So it's not just how you lead at work, it's how you lead in your personal life, with your partner or spouse, with your kids, in your community. And we just believe that narrative needs to continue. And quite frankly, all the research coming out around the baby boomers is they desire to be productive. They want to be relevant. They want to give back,
mm-hmm.
which is really great news to your question about what's the possible impact.
Exactly. And so, you're talking about working with Olympians, working with CEOs, executives. How does all of that apply to, the average Joe retiree?
Great question. And the truth is, it's the same pathway. Now, there are different pearls and different opportunities, but the road is a shared road, regardless of status or of where one is in their as they approach retirement. And what we know is that one survey recently said 83% of pre-retirees said they expect to live their best lives in the third act of life, right? Mm-hmm. So we have sort of a positive mood set there. 83 said they would rather save more money today so they don't have to cut back on retirement. And 81% said that there's more job and career opportunities for people in post-retirement. So that's just one survey, but it's sort of cool, right? We talk about the 3 Ps in our work at Questage: purpose, productivity, and positivity. And those 3 are really pillars for the work we do with our clients. Because we're talking about repurposing, right? We're shifting an identity. We're the only culture in the world that I know of, when you go to a cocktail party, the first question normally is, so what do you do? Mm-hmm. Right? And I lived in Europe when I was in college, and, other countries, they don't put the vocation front. They're like, well, Nate, where are you from? Tell me about your family, mm-hmm. right? It gets very intimate and very personal, but, so we need to really sort of back to that CFO that was in my office 30 years ago. we want to change the narrative so that we're really defining that third act and the legacy of that individual, so that they really are fully engaged and positive and contributing. You've heard the 60s being the sort of the go-go years, the 70s being the slow go, and the 80s the no-go. And I think you watch what happens in this next decade or two, because I think we're going to stretch that all the way out into the 90s, right? One of the phenomena that I love seeing in the United States, in fact, it's happening here in Phoenix, Scottsdale area, is that retirement facilities are now putting them, they're being built on U.S. campuses. In fact, here at Arizona State University, they've just launched a major facility, and they have full access to any class at the university. So the baby boomers are not to the golfing, fishing, knitting story of yesteryear, but rather they're learners, and they want to continue to absorb and learn and be conscious contributors.
Oh, great. Gosh, you said something a little bit ago. I wanted to circle back around to it. I think it was involving the Olympians, and you mentioned something about how they were
mindset.
Their mindset, because there's an immense amount of pressure at that young age.
Correct.
They're still able to perform at world-class levels. So we should be able to help teach, people in their 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s or whatever, how to win that game between the years. And so have you ever run into people that have a really, really hard time making that transition? And maybe they had something happen, like a life event happen, that might actually keep them from doing something that they used to be really, really good at. Like, for example, if they had a stroke and like their eyesight's gone, they can't really fix things like they used to be able to, or do the things they used to be able to. How would you help somebody transition with something like that?
Well, let's first talk to the pain of what you're pointing to. So the worst story that I used to get was the client that type A, driven, but ignoring some signs, and then the stroke happened or the heart attack. Mm-hmm. And I don't, our bodies are, sensors, right? And if we don't pay attention to the clues they're giving us, that's sort of the end result. And I don't want anyone to be capped to have that, to live out their life with that condition, right? So, you just need to Google, stress-related disorders and the amount of billions that are going there. I mean, we right now are in a mental health crisis, right, with a pandemic. I use a very provocative tool at Questage called the Integrative Enneagram out of South Africa. And it's a really beautiful tool that talks about core motivation. And what's beautiful about this particular assessment is that in addition to understanding our core motivation, they can take a real-time test on your stress and strain profile. And of the 8 stressors that they measure, one is psychological strain. And it comes in green, yellow, red. And I've used this tool for years globally with leaders and never, ever had anything but green. And all of a sudden, the last 15 months, I'm seeing red, and I'm seeing a little paragraph that says, you may want to seek out a mental health counselor. And I'm like, what is this, right? And I'm like, and I realized that up until the pandemic, leaders I'd never had someone that was really, stressed out. And now it really is a pandemic, and I'm deeply concerned about that. So, the gift out of my work with the Olympians of yesteryear to fast forward is to really look at, when we talk about positivity, we're talking about taking responsibility to notice the mindset. As I said earlier, who's got the microphone? And unfortunately, a lot of leaders and a lot of people retiring who played intensely slip into where that microphone goes over to the dark side, to that inner critic. I had a client recently last year, 71 years old, amazing, competitive achiever, type A, brilliant career, extraordinarily successful. And then the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden he's out not working for 7 months. And by the time he came to me, we had to do some major rewiring, because he went into that, he started believing that he was no longer relevant, that the technology was going too fast, no one's ever going to hire him again. And he really got into a funk. Right. And so that positivity of the 3 Ps is really talking about, what are you doing to take care of your mindset? And are you noticing through the course of the day who's got that microphone? Because we can be taken out. And when we're talking about transitioning from full-time work into a new identity, that's not an easy dance, right? And we have to make sure that you've got your we really recommend, having a daily practice. We talk about constructing your optimal operating state. What does that mean? And that comes from the Olympians. They figured it out versus being vulnerable. So we get to use these tools to really help the mental conditioning of the third act of life to be really positive.
Okay. So is that some type of an assessment that you have available?
Right. So that's part of, so we have the first phase of the work for Questage for the transitions program is really a beautiful discovery phase where we take the integrative Enneagram and we have a number of reflective exercises and a couple other assessment tools. And basically, clearly we know who we are as we get to the third act of life, but we're just evoking that pause to say, well, let's be very intentional of what we're going to pack for the third act of life and what we're going to let go of, right? Because a lot of our leaders come with robust skill sets, but not all those skills are passionate. So we really want to be surgical of what we're building in for that road mapping process.
Okay. And so then do you see a physical or mental difference in the people as they go through your program from like the beginning to the end?
Well, the good news with us is that we tend to attract learners, lifelong learners that come to this process. We are going to be launching a new program that's actually just for everyday Joe and Josephines. As we said earlier, the process is the process. And mood management is critical for the third act of life. You're dealing with major life issues, your networks are starting to shift. We have to be mindful of health. And, positive psychology has now proven that the optimistic, positive brain will allow someone to live 4 to 5 years longer than that Eeyore or that pessimist that's sort of, curmudgeonly moving through the third act of life. So, yeah, mindset matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would say, I've heard several times the quality of the question determines, the quality of the answer. And so what would be a few examples of some of the questions you might ask to help someone discover, or help them along in this transition?
That's a great question. And we actually made it pretty transparent. We have on the Questage website under transitions, a Are You Ready assessment.
Oh,
and so we ask those questions right up front before we even engage to say, thinking about the third act of your life, do you actually yearn to pay it forward? Do you have a desire to continue to make an impact in your community, albeit foundation, volunteer, charity, consulting, doesn't matter. But, if you don't have a yearning for that, you're not probably for us. Second is, would you consider yourself a lifelong learner? Would you consider someone that's been able to lower the mirror and really understand who you are from a growth and self-awareness perspective? What we're finding is that those have really are intrigued to keep polishing their craft, themselves, right, are great candidates for us because they come with motivation and energy to really want to pay it forward. And then the third is just really centered around, a desire to have the energy to not only stop and smell the roses, but to really yearn to create something that will leave them a legacy, that will leave them, feeling really proud of what they did, particularly in the third act of their life. So those power questions are there. And then once they get into the process, one of the inquiries that we have our clients thinking about is the word freedom, right? And freedom from and freedom to. And, that's an interesting word. And for a lot of our clients, right, freedom hasn't really been in their, we always sort of, well, I feel free to do this, I feel good, free to do that. But we really have them sit around that word, right? Because it's now time to really look at where do you want to place your focus? And we work in decade chunks. So we have, we go out 10 years from whatever age they are. We really get mindful around, how much time do you want to spend in the leadership piece, in the work productivity, and then in the life productivity. What do you want to do? Travel, health, exercise, relationships, family, grandkids, kids. So it really gets to be really flushed out in a beautiful way where they're in charge and they can sort of ebb and flow. And as you can imagine, 60 60 somethings are going to have more energy to be, be in that work productivity, whether they're compensated or not. But as you get in your 70s and 80s, that begins to shift. So it's a really wonderful fluid roadmap that they can tweak as they move through their third act of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you may have talked about, I think, certain aspects of this so far, but I want to see if we can get like maybe a formal definition of what this high impact retirement really is.
Well, that's a great statement, because when we say high impact, it's like, okay, what? Right. And again, it takes me all the way back to my career consulting days, right? Because my first client, when I went out on my own, and that was a very bold move, when I was peeling my fingers off the desk of my comfortable 23rd floor, office in the financial district of San Francisco. Nope. And, I remember when I was leaving full-time work, I had a number of years at Marriott International. And I remember, when I went entrepreneurial, I shared this amazing news with my mother, and she had 2 words for me: get therapy.
Really?
Big organizations, they're going to take care of you. Marriott, just hang in there. You'll have a good, long life. And that wasn't my purpose. My purpose was to shift, but it was very fearful for her, because she wanted her little baby to be safe and protected. And as you well know, today in 2021, organizations can no longer take care of us. It's really our responsibility to manage and drive our own careers. So I really, looking at my childhood, there was nothing in my scrapbook would have indicated that I was to go entrepreneurial, right? Mm-hmm. But as you know, as entrepreneurs say, boy, when you get that bug, you get the bug, and I never look back. Yeah. So, it is, my first client was literally, my first coaching client was a partner from one of the top consulting firms who I'd met through the career consulting company. And her whole orientation was about high impact, about high performance. And she saw coaching as a wonderful investment for her to grow herself. Mm-hmm. And literally one weekend, she's having a dinner party with 12 people. And someone said, "What's up?" And she said, "Oh, I've hired this amazing guy." And they're like, "You mean the athletic coach?" She goes, "No, it's all about performance. It's all about taking me to the next level." And the whole room was like, "I want his name," right? Because some people see coaching as remedial, or like, "Oh, that's weakness," or that doesn't count for me. Yeah. And the truth is, I had a word of mouth business from that day forward, because I had put myself in the high impact, world. I've had the privilege of writing 3 books, or co-authoring 3 books. And my last one is called Out of the Question: How Curious Leaders Win. And we made the distinction between knower leaders, which were command and control, general, do as I say, and learner leaders, which is more like the guide, curiosity, possibility thinking, and being willing to say, I don't know that answer, but I'll get it for you. Mm-hmm. And the new generation of workers coming in are not going to tolerate the knower leader for very long. It's not respectful. You're aware of what happened in April and May of this year, 6 million people calling it the Great Resignation. Now, as a former career consultant, I'm still trying to get my head around how in the world, when I was that age, it was like, I'm thankful, grateful, I'm loyal, I'm in. And now we have, in the course of 60 days, 6 million people that said, bye-bye, yep. Right? Now we're beginning to dissect that and know that, this new generation, wants to be valued. They want to be at the table. They recognize they don't have the experience, right? But, they're meant to be inspired in team. They don't want to be just sitting out by themselves. And they don't want to be doing minutia. They don't want to do just paperwork for paperwork. They want to be doing things of substance. So under the beginnings of what we think is happening with this resignation is probably some good news, but it's just going to force organizations to get it right, to create that compelling culture that allows people to say, I'm in and I want to stay. So upsetting and sort of weird, but I actually think it may have a positive impact on our work cultures in the next decade or so.
Oh, absolutely. Even as a small company, the couple times where someone has left, it allows us to then kind of, not necessarily, I wouldn't say course correct, but it allows us to adapt and figure out, okay, was there a reason they left that we weren't doing well, right? Or
that's right.
was it just something that they needed to do that we just didn't provide?
That's
so
right.
there's a lot of feedback that can be, gleaned from anytime anybody leaves your culture.
That's right.
And it sounds like the two of us have a pretty similar background as far as we were in a good job. We got the entrepreneurial bug and had to go. When I was consulting financial advisor, I was kind of doing this and consulting at the same time. Well, the consulting was a good 6-figure income. And so to leave that and then just, everything is, I'm full time. If I don't bring anybody on as a client, we don't eat type of a
right.
You said your mom told you get therapy, right? I remember, I don't remember what my mom said, but I grew up on a farm. And so, we risked stuff all the time. Right.
Right.
But my wife, the first words out of her mouth were, "It's about time."
Oh, great.
And so oh, okay.
Great. That is music to my ears because back in my career consulting days, I actually remember a client and his wife said to him, "This wasn't in my plans. You better figure out what you're going to get your job and get it quickly." And I'm like, "Oh, that's really great. Thank you for that motivational tidbit you just gave my client," right? So for your wife to say that, this whole conversation is a team sport, right? And we need to have, in the Questage journey, we talk about getting a board of advisors, right? Because we need you, whether you're entrepreneurial, and I don't care what stage of life, right? We need to make it a team sport. And it's so great to have the right team players that are there to support you and to encourage you on. And props to your wife for that vision and having that mindset. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and I know some people can be motivated by a negative response, like, when your mom said to get therapy, that could have lit a fire,
right.
you. And I understand a lot of people work that same way. And yeah, I do to a point too, but it's nice to have some of that support from home,
Very much so.
With the internal,
That's
monologue there.
Right. And as you can imagine, with Questage and Third Act of Life, we still have, a lot of our clients, both partners or spouses work, right? But there are some that are still sort of in the traditional mindset, and they're not ready for the executive who's gone off to work for 30 years to be like, okay, what are you doing? Right? What are you going to do? Right? And so this is a team sport because we don't, not only do we work with the client, but we work with the client, spouse, or partner because it's we plan holistically for the third act of their life. So, again, when I was at the consulting firm, I was asked to be the retirement coach, right? So here I am talking to people who are getting ready to retire at the age of 32, right? I'm twice my age. And here comes young Bunky and to have this little chat. And I remember always inviting the spouses and saying, we need to make this, let's bring your spouse in. Let's just have the conversation together because sometimes, they're not aligned with the vision of what they want to do, right? Absolutely. One is wanting to, like the 7-1-year-old I spoke to was all about getting back there and getting, he said, I want to be productive. I want to get back there. I love working. And we hit a home run with him. And his wife is saying, well, wait a minute, what about our travel schedule? Right. And so it is nuanced, but it is a team sport, and we have to address, those involved that are going to be walking that path of the third act of life. So it's aligned.
Well, that's good to hear. So it's not just me that has a couple sitting, at the conference room table. And when I ask them what they want to do in retirement, one of them says something, the other one looks at him like, I never knew to do that.
Exactly. What?
Yeah. And you're like, all right, looks like you guys got some stuff to sort out.
Exactly. And that's funny you say that because we actually work with advisors because we want to get you out of the career or the identity piece and get you back to, doing the good stuff you do on the financial side. And, but as a lot of advisors just say, wow, thank you. I'm so glad you exist. Cause it's like, direct shot over to you so I can get back to my day job.
Yeah, I know. I've got a couple of college courses in psychology, but by no means am I any kind of a marriage counselor or.
That's right. Right. That's right.
Deal.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you say that because, there are a lot of coaches out there that are now focusing on that third act of life or retirement. And I believe very much in, that if you're going to be in the advisor chair as a coach, do your work. And so everyone on our team is aligned with the ICF, the International Coach Federation, and their standards and their guidelines. And I really believe if you're going to do this work, then, if you're, like a doctor being a part of the American Medical Association, if you're going to be a coach, why not be plugged into the largest, coaching association and do the work and the certification, so that you have confidence if you're handing off someone to someone like me that we've done our work, right? That you're going to have very happy results versus a train wreck to your client.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, good deal. So I think I've heard in past interviews with you that you've got a different word for retirement. You don't necessarily call it retirement. I believe it was like PROtirement.
Yeah, we don't own that. It's actually that word. We've used it for years, but it's actually owned, I think, in UK, a company in UK. But the challenge we came out of the gates with high impact retirement, Questage, high impact retirement. Okay. And the first thing we got slapped down on is like, well, that's not for me because I don't want to retire, right? And so I like the word PROtirement. It lacks context unless we're in this conversation because it's a made up word. But our clients don't want to retire, right? They don't like that word. They don't like, they have memories of what it meant for their parents or grandparents. And they're like, that is absolutely the opposite of what I want to do with the third act of my life. And so, again, we're very attracted to those people that just are not done, right? And they want to, for years the phone would ring with, very successful people. You look at the resume and it's just stunning. And they're saying, I think there's more for me. Like, I'm like, well, gosh, your resume looks pretty darn good. And I love that. And if we can just slow the narrative down, if we can pause and we can get into a daily practice where we're just asking the question, so is this it? Or is there something else? Is there another bold move that I have? And if the answer is like, I think there is, that's normally when the phone rings for us. It's like, I got this pinpoke of an opening. I think there's more, but I don't know. I don't know, right? And that's that's where we can align beautifully so that we can be plugging into a re-engineered plan that has them waking up, as I said earlier, excited for the week. We do have some negative energy in the space of the boomers. Statistically, in 2020, one statistic we tripped into was the average American retiree watches 48 hours of TV a week. Okay, that's a way, right? But the people that that are attracted to Questage are like, oh no, I don't mind watching TV, but it ain't 48 hours a week, right? and remember, there's a sad line to this because for some people, if they get caught up by that inner critic, they're taking themselves out to where they can only get up to watch the television because they've lost their relevance. They've lost their productivity. We have my wife and I have an amazing couple that we've known for years. They're ahead of us in the age game. And I'm just amazed by them because if they go to a social function, they do not sit down. They stand and mingle. And if anybody comes up and says, so what was your career? So what'd you do? They literally cause a reaction to get out because they're not interested in reliving what they've done. They're fascinated to talk with people who want to be in the current state of what they're doing and what they envision to do. And that to me is very inspiring, right? Notice the orientation of where are you looking in the rearview mirror? Are you excited to look forward?
And I might be bumbling who said this, but I believe it was a question that was asked. Was Frank Lloyd Wright, designed all those crazy custom homes? Asked what his favorite home was, and his response was always my next one.
Next one. Isn't that brilliant? So that just speaks to having energy around positivity and sort of the possibility of what can be. And and for some people, life throws them something, as we talked about earlier, where they are restricted. And we can't deny that as we get older, the health card is going to play itself out. But when we look at the vitality and the mindset where we're taking care of ourselves, we're taking care of our health, we're being mindful of our sleep, what we're eating, who we hang out with. One of the things we do at Questage is sort of do a clean sweep of inventory of who's in your world, right? Because sometimes we have some negative sayers in our world that just aren't serving us for where we're going. And so we have to sort of get the pruners out and do a little trimming, right? Because, if you got a negative naysayer, what we say is a brash move maker, they can bring it down, but it's very hard to bring them up. So it really is a whole game sport here around designing that compelling roadmap for the third act of life.
I think the Debbie Downer, I think, is the generic word for.
That's correct. That's right.
What do they call the Yeah.
I don't know, Doug Downer. I don't know.
Yes, it had to start with a D. It's like everybody with a D gets a bad rap. Debbie, Doug.
Right. And statistics came out recently that's sort of a bit, this was from AARP, a little bit of a wake-up call for the listeners that are, maybe 65 today, right? The probability of enjoying the milestone birthday for someone who's 65 today to get to 85 is 45%. So that's a bit of a wake-up call for me. I still feel like I'm 35 years old, right? Yeah. And I'll be turning 65 in April, and I look at that and I go, whoa! You're telling me that in 20 years I have a 45%. So that makes me get even just hungrier for the topic, right? To be really being deliberate and to say, how do you want it to look like? If you're taking your last breath, what would it look like to say, wow, beautiful life, had some challenges, but I'm so proud of how I really took lead for the third act of our life. Years ago, there was research, Nate, on, they interviewed just people ready to sort of go upstairs. And they said two things. What would you done differently? You may have heard this. Yep. And they said, we take more risks, right? Why was I so careful and steady in my steps of life? And, and then the second piece really had to do with, really thinking about, it's not, I crushed the sales plan. I was advisor of the year. Those are not the snapshots that we'll be, thinking about. It's like when I held my baby, when I went to my grandchild's, graduation, when I had that vacation, So it's just, again, we can't undo the past, but we can be very deliberate and very conscious to define that roadmap that's going to really serve for each individual journey.
Yeah. I know you were talking a little bit ago about the 2020 and what that did to some psyches too. And I can even just speaking for myself, 2020 during the pandemic, having a business, right when everything was in the thick of it, right around the end of March, April, even right. May, everybody's just in survival mode at that point. We were wondering how long is this going to last? Are we going to make it? That kind of thing as far as business goes. And we did. We ended up making it well. However, there's still a lot of transitions that we made and some changes that we had to make in our business to remain successful. And one thing that's actually has done is it has made me, I haven't been needing to spend as much time to do certain things, but with that newfound time, I'm just like, I exercise a little bit more, or do other stuff that was, more self-serving. But then after a while, I'm just like, this isn't fun. I want to get back to doing more things again. It's like, there's got to be more. Right. I want to make a bigger impact. And so I could see how that could be an issue for a lot of people. And I still have a lot of years ahead of me. Am I in the second one? Yep. I'm still in the second act right now.
Right. You're a youngin'. Yep. That's right. But to your point, in fact, Bloomberg wrote about this in April, this new life is short mentality where 1 in 10 baby boomers through the pandemic said it caused them to say, you know what, let's close it up. Let's retire earlier. So they shifted their strategy and just thinking, life is short. And so I don't know where this narrative is going to go, right? But we individually have the opportunity just, again, to lower that mirror and say, what matters to me? What do I want to do that allows me to feel really great about my contributions and my aliveness, my alivometer, right? To feel positive and engaged. Yeah. And that's a positive virus, right? People want to be around that energy.
They do.
Right?
They do. Actually, it's like we don't need to shrink down to fit into, other people's boxes. Is like we need to expand to show them what's possible.
That's right. 100%. That's it. And so you're seeing when people are, my mother, God rest her soul, entered a retirement facility at 80 and she lived to 95, right? And she was a scratch golfer, early on, and they had a 17-hole putting or 18-hole putting course, right? And we'd be out there into her 90s, right? And I often thought, the vitality of community and being productive and getting up and having things to do versus being alone in a house, the house you grew up in, and you're all by yourself. And, so my hope is that we can, make sure that we're putting our arms around the entire aging population, not just the high impact leaders, but how do we put our arms around the whole container and look for solutioning so that those that have had tough experiences or have had setbacks, health or financial, how do we embrace that so that they can also have that a third act of life that is meaningful for them?
Cool. Well, I feel like we're kind of like getting on a roll here, but we're getting close to the time where we need to wrap up. So appreciate the time that you've taken. So thank you for that. If you don't mind, we can maybe go into a few philosophical questions or more rapid fire questions. Other than, obviously we've got, you've written some books. So obviously you can recommend some of those, but are there any other books that you would recommend, maybe authored by other people, that you think would help people transition into this, quote, third act of life?
Well, this is going to confuse you, but one of my teachers is a former Franciscan monk by the name of Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. He's written a number of books, just a phenomenal man and a phenomenal thinker. And one of his books was titled Falling Forward. And, the reason this will trip you up a little bit is he does look at life in two buckets versus three. And he just sort of says, the first 50 years, it's really with a lot of ego. You come in with nothing but a little wet bottom, and then you move into your family and you grow up in school and family systems and hopefully university or advanced education, and then career and family and all of that is what he calls sort of the doingness of life, right? With some pride and some ego. And he really challenges in the book to suggest that in that second half of life is where we have the chance to move from that doingness with that ego to more of a healthy ego where we're really looking to the beingness, right? And so to evoke that pause, much like we do with the mindset and optimal operating state pieces I mentioned with you, where we're just saying, why am I here? And what's the opportunity? In order to do that, we have to slow it down to be able to listen between our ears, right? And so when I was in grad school, my graduate degree is in counseling psychology with a holistic health specialization. So we learned about how people hold themselves, their body, so the whole full system. So when I'm working with a client, I'm taking everything in, how they're breathing, and I remember the third year of grad school, one of the professors saying, "No, this word holistic, you're not going to be able to put on a business card for 20 or 30 years because, people are going to reject it. But there'll come a time where the whole body matters, where you're going to hear meditation being important." And that time has now arrived, where we're seeing CEOs that are, just saying a part of my deal of the day is getting up and exercising and then having some quiet time. And it's in that quiet time, Nate, where we get to really place that inquiry and just say, what matters, And so Richard's book is just, I think, a must read for anyone 50 and older, just to sort of, look at how it resonates with your own life and what changes and opportunities come up that might shift for more meaningful intention.
Okay. So Falling Forward, you said Francis Rohr?
It's Falling Upward.
Oh, Falling Up.
And it's Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. And on Amazon, a ton of books, but that's my go-to for your question.
Okay. Good deal. And then, so another great question I like to ask is, what is something that 20 years from now you would like to have considered completely absurd? Or said another way, if 20 years from now, when you look back, what would you like to say, man, I can't believe that we used to do X or whatever it is?
That's a great one. The first thing that comes to me is really looking at looking at three priorities in life, right? And I used to ask this question in my speaking. Your priorities, is it work first, then family, and then yourself? Or is it your family, work, and then yourself? Or is the priority yourself, your family, and then work? And 20 years out, it would be great to see that we could just tip that entire glass bowl of sand upside down to recognize we're out of balance. And a part of the great resignation is the fact that we can't work any harder. And our families are paying the price tag. And when we're coming home with the red light on, the reserve light flashing, and you got three little kids looking at daddy and mommy, hey, and only a tenth of your brain is physically with them, that's a problem. And I'm hopeful, and I do believe that we may have to wait until the Zoomers, those youngins right now, in a decade or two, because what we're learning about them is that they are very value-based. They care about this kind of conversation, and they want to be connected to purpose and greater things, and with organizations that are doing great stuff. So, this is a fascinating time. We've never had 3 or 4 or 5 generations in the workplace, right? It's very likely you could have a 20-year-old managing a 72-year-old. Yeah. That's interesting, right? That's a whole other topic for us. But my hope would be is that we're able to really shift it so we can get back to, because when we take care of ourselves, we have the energy to really be intentional with our families, and we have great energy then to take into work versus flipping it upside down.
Yeah. I know it's to that effect. There was a comic strip I think I saw one time where it had the one picture was a guy just getting off of work, and it had up in the corner, it had a battery level, and his battery was about halfway full, right?
Right.
And I think he had to pick up some groceries, and now it's down to like the yellow. And then now he's walking to his front door holding everything, and you can just see his whole countenance, his head is down, and the battery's in the red. Well, then all of a sudden his little daughter, I don't know if she's like 3 at the time, comes out and like hugs him. And as he's hugging him, that strip, it's back up all the way to full, right?
Oh, good.
And I'd like to say that's like, when I go home, that it does refill it a little bit. It doesn't go back full. No, it doesn't go back full, but it does refill it a little bit, recharges it a little.
That's right. Well, what matters most, tending to those lovely children just want ounces of time with you, or keeping you plugged in with all the stuff that beckons to you at your work. And so it's a bold move, but I love your last question, because if I had a magic wand, that's what I'd love to flip.
Yep. Great. All right. Well, what's some of the best advice you've ever received?
I had the privilege of having a couple really strong male mentors early on in my life. And one of them, who was my boss in my first job, said, Allan, life is short. Come from kindness, assume the best, and always focus on intentions that will serve you but will serve others. And at the time I heard that, I was in my 20s, and I wrote it down. And it's like an orchid that bloomed, because as I got older and older, I really saw the depth in what he was giving me as a gift around to how to focus that. And on the flip side, I had a quote it got lost in a relocation, and I remember it was anonymous, but the quote said, "Failure to meditate should be considered among man's greatest enemies." And I thought that to be so provocative. That was probably 15 years ago, and we just already mentioned the meditation word just a few minutes ago. But I really do think it's important for us to slow it down, to unplug, and be really clean in the mind of what really matters for you. And that's internal. It's not absorbing things from what people are telling you or external. I'm saying to my clients, be very mindful when you turn on the television for news. Force field yourself, because that's not going to be something that's going to be Olympian for you. And, truthfully, how about putting that time just in some silence to be able to really be in touch with what's up? It's never failed. So I'd leave you with those two.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. The assume the best. That's always that's a positive mindset right there.
Right. Very, very.
And share one of your own personal habits, if you don't mind, that you believe has led to your own success.
Well, probably I'll just stay right on topic. I'm extroverted, so and in my early working careers, I ran pretty fast. I was like a little baby quail in the desert, just going from task to task, and first in, first out, and or I said first in and last out, and then I actually hired a therapist who taught me to learn how to breathe, because in all that excitement, I became a chest breather, right? It was like, just go, 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 right? Like a little puppy. Mm-hmm. And I did some Reiki and breath work with him for over a year. And it was so amazing because it was just really breathing from the belly, deep breaths. And every time I would come out of that, my eyes would be closed. I'd swear that he had re-wallpapered the office. I'm like, how long has that been there, right? Because I'd walk into the session with like 23, like a rock and roll band in my head with all the noise. Mm-hmm. And then it would drop down just to a flautist. And I would come out of it and I'm like, damn, this is pretty cool. And, so that's really served me to be able just to watch my own pace and to be able to, I'm not perfect. My wife will certainly tell you that, but again, it's back to the intention and the mindfulness to be able to look at what needs calibrating, to have your best life.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Well, then, any parting pieces of guidance that you'd give before we wrap it up here for the day?
I think what occurs to me is just sort of put a theme on this conversation, right? To recognize that as we go into the third act of life, we have profound choice. And I think it's really important to really assess, what have you made up about the third act of life? What were the impressions? What were the things you observed when you were younger around that? We get to be a choice with it. As I said to you, I feel like I'm 35, not 65. And I really believe that we have a lot of energy, a lot of wisdom, to be able to be solution providers to some of the complexities of our world. And I remain very confident that we can be change agents in the coming couple of decades.
Absolutely. Agreed. So where would be the best place for people to find you if they wanted to reach out or become involved or maybe even go through your process?
Everything is at Questage, QuestAge.com. And we have the leadership track for those that are still in their careers. And then we have the high impact transitions track where they can go in and take that Are You Ready assessment. There's a little video that sort of makes the case of what we're talking about, and other resources to help them guide them with their choices.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes then. Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, all right. Well, then, Allan, definitely thank you so much for coming on. I believe that you're going to help a lot of people make that transition into the third act, and therefore, help rescue some PROtirements, and right. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, I appreciate your energy and what you're doing, because obviously you're in this with me, helping to have that third act of life be as robust financially as well as productive. So it's been a pleasure.
All right. And we're out. Okay. So yeah, thank you. That was great. And then we'll make sure to link to all of that. I'll have my marketing director send you an email on whether or not that it's going to be this Monday or next Monday when
Perfect.
Coming out.
Perfect.
It might be this Monday. And then you can share that once everything is synced. I'll end up giving you the Dropbox link to the raw file as well. That way you can dissect it.
Well, we'd love to Well, we'd love to pay it forward by having this on our social media and certainly on Questage. So let me just add, I know we're still recording, but I'm just sort of curious. This is not your first rodeo. If there was one thing that came out of our conversation that had you sort of go, wow, that's different. Yeah. And then all the folks you've talked to, you've been in this space for a long time. What would that one thing be?
I think the biggest one I caught was how big of an impact that you believe that we can still make in that third, because a lot of them are like, oh, let's just find out what our our purposes and make it a fulfilling life just for ourselves, but then how to make a huge impact from the leadership standpoint.
That's right.
With that, I mean, and it's just that life expectancy is just going to get longer and longer.
That's right. That's right. That's it.
I think you mentioned, you can be into 85. The statistics I've gotten, you can, depending on which survey you read, right? You have a 50-50 shot of making it to 90 and a 25% shot of making it to 95.
Wow.
Once you hit age 65, you've got the 50-50 and the 25% chance.
Wow. Yeah.
So think of the couple that you hang out with the most, one of you's ended up going to be 95.
That's right. That's exciting. Well, good. From one Midwestern to another, to a Jayhawk, thank you. Love your energy. I love your energy is just great. And so thank you for inviting me in, and I'm hoping this will be of high value to your listeners.
And you too. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Bye.